Thanks everyone for joining us today. A few more people to admit. Okay. My name is Kate Travis, and I serve as the managing editor of CASW Connector, which is a database of resources on science writing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And CASW, or the Council for the Advancement of Science Writing, is the host of today's conversation on fellowships. And we've got a great panel of folks here to talk about both where to find fellowships, what a fellowship actually is, and the process of doing one, how to craft a proposal, how to have a competitive application for a fellowship, and more. So we'll meet them in a second. I am just going to take the host prerogative here to introduce you first to show you a little bit about CASW Connector. Just an administrative note, I'm going to go ahead and mute. I'm going to ask people to mute themselves while the speakers are talking, and I hope that we'll all be able to talk together a little bit later, but in the meantime, please remember to just mute yourself on Zoom. Okay, so let me pop over here. So this is CASW Connector, a resource library for resources on science writing. And I think hopefully my dream is, of course, that you already know what Connector is and that you've had a chance to take a look at the site. But with the site itself is meant to bring together resources from all around the internet that are specifically devoted to science writing, the craft of science writing, and being a science writer. This is the site right here, and we take resources from all sorts of, we have all different kinds of resources. You'll see right away that you can search. If you're looking for something specific, you can search. And then we've provided some quick links for you. And in honor of today's conversation on fellowships, I have, of course, stacked the deck and put a button right here for you called Fellowships and Grants. And you can see right away what resources we have. And they include articles about doing a fellowship, and they include individual fellowships themselves. So to answer that first question of where to find fellowships, I would invite you to look at the Connector website to start. I hope you'll also take a look and look for other resources that you might find interesting on the site. When you explore on our search page, you can search for, based on where you are in your career stage, the type of work that you do, a specific topic that you're looking for, or a format. Or if you're a person that you have some favorite resources, we'd invite you to hit this big suggest a resource button up here and share them with us so that we can share them with other people. And with that, I would love to stop talking and get into the topic of fellowships. So let me stop sharing my screen. And oh my goodness, hello everyone. I didn't even know there were this many people here already. So I'm going to go ahead and have our guests, our panelists, introduce themselves. So Deborah, can I kick it over to you to say hello?
Sure. Hi, it's great to be here. My name is Deborah Blum. I'm director of the Knight Science Journalism program at MIT.
Neil, do you want to say hello?
Hi, yeah, I'm Neil Danesha. I'm a founding staff writer at Heatmap.
Okay, Jyoti.
Hi, I'm Jyoti.
We're having a little trouble hearing you, Jyoti.
Oh, sorry about that. Is this? Hi, I'm Jyoti Madhusudanan. I'm a freelance science journalist based out of Portland, Oregon.
Great. And then also from CASW, we have with us Betsy. Do you want to say hello?
Hey, I'm Betsy, a freelance science writer and the community manager for Connector. So I'll be doing monitoring if folks have questions or anything during this webinar.
And Raz.
Hi, I'm Roz Reed, the Executive Director of CASW. Happy to welcome you all to our first Connector Chat. Thanks for coming.
Very much. All right, so just as just by way of getting started, let me let's just to kind of get a sense of what brought you all here. I'm going to launch a poll just to see, kind of get a sense of what brings you here today and where what you're interested in and that sort of thing. Wow, okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this and share. All right. So all over the map, which is great. I love to see it, okay. Awesome. All right, so I think just to kick us off, Deborah, I'm going to ask you, as a person who has some experience administering a fellowship. You know, there's a lot of different types of fellowships. Some invite you to step away from your regular job, others are project-based. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of just the different kinds of fellowships that we can talk about, and that will kind of help us set the stage going forward of the type of for different different applications, different processes for the different types of fellowships.
Sure, and you're absolutely right, Kate, that there's a huge sort of variety of fellowships out there. Some are just for a week. Some, like ours, are a full academic year. Some are very project specific. Some are more to give you an opportunity to step away and just write, say. And so, you know, as an example, the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole does a fellowship, which is just I cannot say that. You immerse yourself in marine biology for a week or two up in Cape Cod. That's one type of fellowship. There are fellowships that are specifically to support a writing project, in which you can do those from your home without it going anywhere. And there are academic fellowships like ours, in which you take a year, you have to relocate, and you spend that year being supported in a research project or a book, or just enriching your knowledge in a particular area of science. They're all over the lap, and this is a good, or the map, this is a good time to bring this up, because a lot of the academic fellowships anyway are open for application now. The Knight Wallace fellowships at the University of Michigan are open now. We open next week, right? So you're seeing this moment in which, if you're interested in that kind of fellowship, this is a really good time to think, here's my moment.
Okay, I'm going to kick this next question to Jyoti. You actually just finished a fellowship, and you've done a couple of different ones, like Deborah just described. Can you tell us more about the fellowships that you've done?
Sure. So I just wrapped up the Alicia Patterson Fellowship a few months ago. I've also done the Knight Science Journalism Project Fellowships during the pandemic. And I've done a few of these smaller fellowships that Deborah just described, which are more contained in different ways. There are the Association of Healthcare Journalists offers short training fellowships, which are just a few days long and a way to get up to speed on a particular topic, and really learn the science behind the subject. I've also done the Gerontological Society of America offers a fellowship that gives you support to attend their conference and learn about science in the field there. And I think each of those have value in different ways professionally, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go along.
Sure. Okay, and Neil, I'm going to kick the same question to you, but before I do, I just want to point out, Betsy dropped in the chat a link to a Google Doc to take collaborative notes if you are into such thing. And I would just, I am not going to be taking notes during this. I'll be paying close attention to what we're talking about and to questions that you have. But if anybody, if you love to take notes and if you love to drop links in the same place, I would love for that to be kind of a resource document for us to have to take away from today's conversation. Enough of that. So Neil, can I ask you the same question about the fellowships that you've done?
Yeah. Bless you, whoever that was. Sorry. Yes, I've done. So the most recent one I completed was the Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting Fellowship, which we called SHRF, which sounds very similar to SHRP, which is the program at NYU. And that one's run by CASW, NASW, AIDS, CJ, and SCJ, which is a word salad of acronyms right there. But essentially, the science writing, health writing, and environmental journalism professional organizations all run this together. And that was, I want to say, 6 to 8 months. And me and 11 other brilliant journalists from around the country got to go to each of those organizations' conferences and also had a bunch of trainings along the way, both before and during and in between each conference. And then we had our own little meeting afterwards. And so I've done that. And I've also done a couple of institutes with the Institute of Journalism and Natural Resources, which are a bit different. These are much shorter, sometimes 2 days, sometimes a week, where they take you in the field to a place to learn about an environmental topic on the ground, which has helped me in my reporting a lot because I've been really interested in some topics that I just haven't been able to get field experience in before. So those were really helpful for like letting me see these things up close and personal.
Okay, great. And I think, I guess, since you're talking, Neil, I'll start with you on this one, which is like, what was kind of your biggest takeaway from that experience and from doing that having that opportunity?
There's a lot of things. I think there's there's a lot of really important things that you learn professionally, which I can talk about. But I think a sort of a benefit that I didn't realize I would care as much about, but I really deeply do, is that through these fellowships, I got to meet journalists who were also early in their career, who were doing similar things as me, and became very close to them. And actually, I recognize a few names in this chat because I met them at some of the conferences, and that was kind of invaluable. I think that writing is a very solitary profession, and being able to connect with folks who were, I've worked in national newsrooms for my entire career, connecting with folks who worked in local newsrooms who worked on other sides of the country was really important. I think just to make this feel like more of a collective thing that we are all engaging in, as opposed to something that I'm doing by myself here at my desk. And then, I can also talk about all the things I learned about science, environmental, and health writing. But that, I think, was the biggest takeaway.
Kelsey, can I ask you the same question?
Sure. I won't repeat everything Neil said, though I definitely second all of that. The community is an invaluable aspect of fellowships. I think with the Alicia Patterson, where you're basically given financial support and asked to produce a certain specific stories, having those several months to deeply immerse in a topic allows this mental space to just cross-pollinate your stories and dive deep into the reporting, build connections with sources in ways that would be very hard to do as an independent journalist when you're on tight turnarounds, there's income goals and so on. So really just having that space to build that professional resource for yourself has been really huge for me.
Can I continue to put you on the spot a little bit about that fellowship? I think a lot of people in the registration, their questions were just like, where do you even start with a proposal for a fellowship or that sort of thing? And I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us through what the arc of your last fellowship was, from kind of the idea that you had. Did you have the idea and then you wanted to apply for the Alicia Patterson Fellowship, or did you know about the fellowship and so you came up with an idea, and then what was the process there?
Sure. So I personally don't typically think about a fellowship and then come up with an idea for it. The Alicia Patterson in this case was sort of a natural extension. My project was about, I was reporting on clinical trials. I've spent the last few years, since shortly before the Knight Fellowship that I did in 2020 now, really thinking about this particular beat of mine, which is this interface of science and clinical practice and how basic scientific research gets into patient care. So reporting on clinical trials sort of grew out of that, and I had been building towards a project. So it just so happened that the deadline was coming up, and I had this mass of pre-reporting that I wanted to take the time to coalesce into specific stories. So that's kind of how my particular proposal for that one came about.
And feel free to drop questions in the chat if you would like to ask any of the panelists specific questions. So that was very helpful, kind of like marrying an idea with a fellowship. I think, Deborah, do you have any, when you're talking to science journalists and advising, do you have any particular places that you, or questions that you ask, or places that you send people to try to figure out the right fit for kind of what they're looking to do? Is there any particular places that you send people, or advice that you give them when they're thinking about a fellowship or kind of a change or a project? Oops, you're on mute.
Mostly when people come to me about fellowships, they're asking about the one here at KSJ. And, we'll have some conversation about whether this very science-focused fellowship is the right one for them. I should mention, when GOD was a project fellowship, and during the pandemic, we ran a kind of an unusual form of remote fellowships in which we supported more people, and we supported very specific work, a magazine story, a book, a documentary film, and that was US focused. We're normally international focused, mostly because of the way MIT rules apply to how we pay for fellowship. And so in general, when people write to me, they'll say, I'm interested in your fellowship, and also what's the best way for me to be successful in an application. And I'll talk about some of the generalities of that. And I'll also mention other fellowships if it looks like their interests are really beyond ours. For instance, there's a whole host of Knight fellowships at different universities around the country. The Knight Fellowship at Columbia is focused on business journalism, right? But is also applicable to science journalists who are interested in the business of science, right? I'm interested in healthcare business. That fellowship would be good. The Stanford Fellowship is very focused on entrepreneurial journalism. I'm going to launch my own podcast. I'm going to do these creative sort of things to build something new. That fellowship is for something like that, right? The Neiman Fellowships and the Knight Wallace Fellowships are more general journalism fellowships, right? So if you're not really sure, if you're not focusing on an interest like science or business, say, those are better. And so I'll talk to people, just trying to get a sense of what the good fellowship fit is. Within that, within the I'm interested in science journalism, there's a whole other layer of things that would help you be more successful, say with us, that I'm happy to talk about, and also to add some of the caveats of that. But in general, what I'm really talking to people about is the fit, right? What's the fit for where you want to end up, and how much time do you have to do this? And in the case of an academic fellowship like ours, can you blow up your life for a year and move to Cambridge, Massachusetts?
Yeah. So to some extent, it's like have a conversation like this is to figure out which which fellowship is the correct match for the idea that you have. I think while I have you, I think a definite bias in the questions that people asked at the beginning is what does make for a successful application. So I don't think it's ever too early for us to launch into that topic. So Deborah, do you want to keep going in what makes a successful application to the Knight Fellowship?
Sure, and here's where I start with a big caveat, right? In this way, we're a fellowship, and so when we're making a decision about a class of fellows, it looks different every single year, right? We're looking for, a well-rounded class of people who are interested in science, but from different areas of science. We're not, going to do a monoculture class in which everyone is interested in the same thing. We look for different people who are coming from different areas of media. We look for geographic diversity. We look for, other ways that make this a complicated, interesting group. So, the successful application one year might not succeed the next year because it's a different mix. Right. And so a lot of times when people say to me, what's my guaranteed application? I say that is going to vary some year by year. The one thing that is consistent there, and then I'll talk about a couple other things, is that this is a fellowship. The fellowship is in some ways your family away from home. While you're in Cambridge, a place that many of these people have not lived before, they don't know anyone. We want the fellowship to be like a family and a support system. So in the interview process, we're actually looking at, would you be a good member of a family? And we've occasionally done, when we get to the actual in-person interview or Zoom interview part of the process, had really outstanding science journalists who spend a lot of time telling us how they're better than any other science journalist in the world, and, operate on such a high platform that no one would ever be anywhere as good as them. And we're all going, would you want to hang out with that person for a year? So, we're looking for a whole human being in this, and someone who is going to be a good fellow. And that is consistent fellowship to fellowship. And in the group we have now, which ranges from, infectious disease reporter from Science to an editor for Nature in the Asia Pacific to an astronomy writer for Science News to a climate change reporter from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. All of these guys are forming an incredibly close family. They celebrate birthdays and holidays together. They do things for each other all the time. To me, that's a successful fellowship class. At KSJ, the other thing that is going to work in your favor, we want you to have had 3 consecutive years of practicing science journalism for the academic fellowship. And that's less than some. Knight Wallace wants 5 consecutive years. We looked for at least a 2-year break from a previous academic fellowship. So we're not looking for someone who just rolled out of the Neiman's to come over to the Knights, right? We're looking. And then I was just going to say, and we're looking for someone who thinks of science journalism as independent inquiry. We're looking for evidence that this is serious journalism. It's journalism infused with an interest in, say, social justice or investigation or something where we see that this reporter brings substantive work to the table. And all of that is important to a successful application. I'm sorry, what were you going to ask me, Kate?
I was just going to ask if you, I just think like that, you know, a lot of what you said there is so important. And I was going to ask if you ever invite people to reapply.
Yes, and some of our fellows have applied, are on their third or fourth application before we pick them.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, I mean, you know, a lot of times it doesn't, your application actually was really great. It's just that there were a lot of people who had really great applications. And I think when I'm talking to mentees or students or colleagues, even, I always, you know, say like, get whatever information you can about why your application wasn't selected, and if you, you know, if you should apply again. This isn't a fellowship per se, but I did a leadership program at the Poynter Institute, and it took me three applications to actually get it. And when we got there, by the end of the week, it was a 1 week in-person training. By the end of the week, we said, you know, we felt like a family, and that felt on purpose. And it's exactly like you said, it's the people on the other end of it, not just putting together only the best applications. That wasn't it. It was putting together a group of people who would feed off of each other and really make the most of the experience. So I think the kind of the takeaway in my experience is that a lot of these fellowships have come out, you know, are a genuine interest in funding excellent work. And you know, because you didn't succeed the first time does not mean that you should not apply again.
I 100% apply again, and even sometimes apply again, right? Because if you're good enough to get to the point that you're a finalist, right? We get 150, sometimes up to 200 applications a year for the 10 fellows. We whittled that down to 25 finalists. It's at that 25 finalist level. If you get to that point, we have already decided that you're good enough to be a fellow, right? And so if you make it to that and you don't get selected for that final group of 10, we want you to apply again. I write to everyone, or I call them and say, you should apply again, because next year you might be the right fit.
In the vein of successful project proposals, Jyoti, we traded a few notes in the background a little bit, just talking about what makes for a successful proposal for a fellowship. Do you have anything you want to share there?
So I think just building off of what Deborah said about having, and Neil said, I think one of the big things for me has been finding that balance between something you genuinely care about and something that's deeply important from a broader societal perspective. When writing that proposal, really putting those together and thinking both about the granularity and the specifics of how you're going to execute this project, but also thinking about the impact and the relevance to a broader audience. Thinking about funding priorities. If you're applying to a particular fellowship that's funded by a foundation that prioritizes a particular area of reporting, it comes back to that idea of marrying your idea to the fellowship itself and making sure the priorities for your work are aligned with the priorities of the fellowship. I think one of the things that I end up talking to mentees a lot about is thinking big when it comes to impact and relevance, expanding the possibilities of what you can do. So just for instance, if you have a story that you have reported in your community deeply, and by community, it could be a global community, a hyper-local community, whatever. It helps to think about how to grow that out to maybe a national context. Can you add a data reporting component to your project? Really pushing the limits of both the extent of the reporting and what it means. And by meaning, I think about moving into more abstract ideas of, what does this say about political priorities or moral values or society or whatever else, but something bigger than just the immediate story at hand.
Okay, so one of the questions actually was how would a fellowship proposal differ from a journalism pitch? And so that would be one of the differences. There are some similarities, and that's what you started with, which is to make sure that your project aligns with the values of the fellowship that you're doing, the same way that you would want to align a pitch for an article to align with the values of the publication that you're pitching to. So any other differences you think for pitching to a proposal for a fellowship versus a journalism pitch?
I have one, actually. Sorry, I know you were, this question might be for Jyoti. I think that with the early career fellowships, what I found, sort of along the lines of what Deborah was saying, like you might not have like a world-shattering investigative story to pitch or a large project because you're early in your career. It's a good chance to like get your personality across, and like why you care about the work that you're doing. I think we can get really caught up in wanting to do the world-shattering story, but like Deborah was saying, like one of the biggest things that makes these fellowships what they are is the people. And so show the fellowship why you should be one of those people.
So on the early career topic, one of the other questions that came from the registrants was, how do you get references for fellowship applications when you're so early in your career? And then related is, if you're a freelancer, how do you find the best people for references? Any suggestions from y'all?
Are you asking what makes a good reference, Kate?
Yeah. So when you're an early career journalist, so where who would be a good reference for early career folks, and then also and for freelancers. So that can be same answer or different answers. I have thoughts on this, but you all are my guests.
So, I'll tell you what I think from my perspective. I don't think this is one size fits all necessarily. When people apply to CASJ, we ask them as part of the application process to, propose a research project. I'm coming to work on a book, or, just to give you an example, this year, we have a fellow looking at river pollution in disadvantaged communities. We have a fellow looking at scientific disinformation. We have a fellow looking at the plight of the whales off the East Coast, right? So we have asked them to come in and say, here's one of the ways I'm going to take advantage of spending a year in this, very overeducated corner of America where there's all these great resources. In tandem with that, if you have someone who can write a reference letter saying, so-and-so, has a very strong background in environmental reporting, or, or something that would suggest that this person has awareness of their work and awareness of the kind of work that will make this a strong proposal, that's great. But to me, the number one most important thing about any reference letter, and as far as I'm concerned, this includes your mother, is that the person actually sounds like they know you and know your work. We get reference letters from so-and-so tags a university professor who will actually literally write us a letter that sounds like, yes, so-and-so was in my class and I think they were either in the second or third row. And at that point you're like, great. So when you're getting a reference letter, the most important part about it is not that they're the most famous person you know or anything like that, because everyone knows that you're going to pick people to write your reference letters who are going to say good things about you. No one expects you to pick anyone to write a reference letter with someone who's going to trash you. But really think about getting people who can speak to who you are and the kind of work you do. That to me is the best reference letter. Everything else is secondary to that. And I'll add briefly to that, I write a lot of reference letters. And so I always say to the people I'm writing letters for, you know, maybe I haven't followed every minute of your career since you graduated from my class or whatever. So fill me in, send me your CV, tell me what you think is really important. I want to write a letter that makes it sound like I can speak to your strengths, right? Those kind of letters are the letters that are going to work.
So just say think about which editors you have a particularly good relationship with, especially if you're early career or freelance. I think earlier in my career, I always was like, who are the editors who I think like I've had a particularly fruitful editing relationship with, which I think when I reached out to them and was like, hey, like, would you be interested in writing a reference letter? They were people who had seen my writing grow and my reporting skills grow, and I think could speak really well to why I would be a good fit for those early career opportunities too, which was pretty helpful.
Yeah, and I would my very brief thoughts on this as well, just to answer for the freelancer side, is don't hesitate to ask your editors for reference letters for fellowships. I have, as long as I have been an editor, which is over 20 years, I've managed freelancers, and I have written many more freelancer reference letters than anything else. And I think, you know, the particularly for whatever fellowship you're applying for, you know, presumably you have a good relationship with that editor, but if you're applying for a specific fellowship, help that editor out that you approach and say, you know, I work with you on this, but in my, you know, other parts of my life, I am interested in this topic. And I would, you know, would you consider writing a reference letter for, and tell me why, like, you know, you've written, you know, we've worked together over time. I'm interested you know, I'm interested in some corroboration that, you know, I'm capable of, you know, doing deep research on a topic, or interested in this particular topic, or that sort of thing. But don't hesitate to reach out to your editors if you're a freelancer to ask for reference letters. We have a bunch of questions in the chat. I know there's many. I just happened to scroll. I'm happy to ask these, but the one that has a few upvotes for me is from Camilla Price. Are you interested in unmuting and asking your question?
Sure. I don't know if you can hear me where I
Yes.
am. Wonderful, thank you. So, you know, Deborah Bloom was talking about the MIT program, and it sounds wonderful. It does require a lot of prior experience in science journalism. And so I was wondering which fellowships were geared toward more early career science journalists who don't have that level of experience or training.
I did, like I mentioned, the Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting Fellowship, which is very much an early career fellowship. That one, I know that they're still working on securing the next round of funding, and so the application cycle has shifted a little bit from when I applied, but I know they're going to reopen applications as soon as they secure funding, so I highly recommend applying for that one. If you are a journalist of color, I've benefited a lot from being in the Uproot project, which is a community for environmental journalists of color. There's a lot of resources available through Uproot to do fellowships or other such events. They sometimes will also provide the funding to go to the Society of Environmental Journalism conference, which again is not quite the same thing, but like I think being involved in those communities is very helpful. And then there's like a variety of early career fellowships, which are more like jobs that are run by newsrooms, but I think those have been slowly dwindling over time. So the ones I would have suggested there no longer exist.
I'll just add for early career writing with, you know, when you don't have several years of journalism experience, I highly recommend the shorter fellowships like the marine biology, the immersive program that Deborah described earlier. There's also the Journalists in Aging Fellows program. AHCG offers these shorter training programs. And there's some fellowships that just crop up every now and then. as funding becomes available to various organizations, where it's a small commitment of time and money towards a particular project. So it really helps in your early career to think about using those smaller opportunities as ways to build towards a body of work that helps you feel experienced enough and confident enough to apply for something larger.
All right. Pragati, you have a question as well. Are you interested in unmuting and asking your question out loud?
Hi, this is Pragati. So I wanted to know if there were fellowship opportunities for reporters or journalists based out of South Asia specifically, because a lot of these fellowship opportunities are also made available for US-based journalists or journalists reporting out of US or other Western countries.
I don't have a specific answer, but I'm hoping we can brainstorm this together.
Oh, are we talking about international? I mean, could we clarify a little bit what we mean? Are we looking at opportunities for science journalists not in the US, or what are we talking about exactly?
Specifically South Asia / international. I think other people had international questions as well. So
Sure. Well, most of the night fellowships are in fact international this year. We take 10 fellows, 6 of them are from other countries this year, right? And so we're, I think, going to launch another fellowship, not for Southeast Asia, but we're in the process of putting together funding in case anyone's interested to do a 1-semester fellowship, probably starting in 2025, which would only be for journalists from Africa. And you'll see this at the other fellowships as well. The Niemans have I think the Niemans have 1 fellowship that's just for Canadians, right? So there are a whole lot of opportunities in these US-based fellowship programs for fellows from other countries. In addition, there are some, I'm trying to think of some, the Heidelberg University, for instance, runs a fellowship for journalists who are interested in physics. I think there you spend a month in Germany. There are fellowships in Latin America, Sarapiata, which is a science foundation based on in Brazil that I've been on the board of for the last 6 years, does all kinds of fellowships in Latin America, really focused in Brazil, but they do some without, right? Lynn Walker at Inquire First, which is based in San Diego, really focuses on different programs that supports journalists in Latin America, and the World Federation of Science Journalists has traditionally run some kinds of training programs and fellowships in countries throughout Asia and Southeast Asia. So, those are there. I can't off the top of my head list all the international fellowships, but I can tell you that almost every good fellowship in the United States has an international component.
this is going to be a benefit of the recording, is that if we haven't captured all of these, I'm going to go back and make sure that all of these links are in Connector, as well as in our Google Doc for this session. I will say I was also looking just this week at the Carter Center's fellowship for mental health journalism, and they have specific ones to support folks in Latin America, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Again, I'm broadening this up to the international, which ones are specifically for folks outside of the United States. Other ideas there?
I know that SEJ, the Society of International Journalism, offers fellowships, which most provide funding for international journalists to come to their conference. And I was a conference buddy for a few of those folks this year, which again is not quite the same thing, but it does provide you an opportunity to travel to the US and meet a bunch of other journalists, and sort of it provides some of that similar community building thing that I was talking about with the fellowships that I did. And I again will plug the Uproot project, which does a pretty good job of keeping an eye out for fellowships that are available to folks from not the US, and to journalists of color generally. So again, I don't know that many off the top of my head, but I think those are good places to start looking.
Great. Lindsay, are you interested in unmuting and asking your question? Because I think it's an interesting one and I don't know the answer.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is even the right place to ask the question, but I know there's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge here, so I thought I would. I'm interested in looking for funding for kind of a community building and mentorship kinds of things. And I'm just curious, like, if anyone knows of, or if fellowships are even the right place to even be thinking about that kind of stuff.
I mean, Lindsay, could you clarify a little bit more what this would be? The kind, are you talking about journalistic community building, or community building built around a story, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of just exploring right now, so I don't necessarily have anything concrete. But I just attended the Mexican Network of Science Journalists annual meeting, and I just think a lot about how to get, I guess, maybe like even students collaborating across borders. I think there's a lot of interest there, and I'm really in the very much just thinking about things stage. I don't have like a concrete plan, but I just thought, oh, I wonder what's out there.
I will say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, each of the professional organizations that I have interacted with so far, the science writing, health writing, and environmental writing ones, have not even if outside the realm of fellowships, they have mentorship programs, like mentorship matching programs, usually around their conferences, and so that might be a good place to start if you're looking for mentorship specifically. And then the fellowship that I did had mentorship built in, and each of the fellows was paired with a mentor, and that was a pretty crucial component of the entire thing. So I think that both of those would be good places to look at if you're looking for mentorship specifically.
I'll just quickly add, this is not a fellowship, but the National Association of Science Writers has funds that are, they often support projects that are specifically around community building or building resources. So it's not a fellowship exactly, but there is financial support available for such projects through different journalism organizations that might be worth looking at.
And this is not a fellowship, but it's worth considering for next year. I'm on the committee of the Wendy and Eric Schmidt awards in excellence in science communication. And when you drill down into those awards, they split between scientists and journalists, but and we've picked the winners for this year, so you'd be looking at next year. But we've had quite a few discussions in these applications about supporting the engagement of journalists within their communities. We've looked at, and in fact, I think one of the winners this year was a journalist who was looking at groundwater contamination in some of the definitely underserved communities in the West. And part of her proposal for the award was to do community building based around and community education based around those stories. So there are journalism awards out there that really are starting to think about, what does it mean to be a journalist interacting with a community. That I don't know if this is as international as you're thinking, Lindsay, but I'm definitely seeing it in the Schmidt Award. And if you don't know these Schmidt Awards, there are 12 awards for science journalists, and the top award in each category is $40,000. The 2 runner-up awards are $20,000, and it includes additional training and community building done by us here at CASJ and also at UC Santa Cruz. So there's a lot of very innovative thought going into that award, and it might be worth taking a look at that next year.
Great.
Well, thank you so much.
We are rapidly coming close to the hour. I have one question, a good question that came directly to me, so I'm just going to say it rather than invite the person to unmute. Is, are there fellowships that help people pivot into science journalism? The one that comes to mind immediately for me is the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. Are there others that are like that, or that are like accelerator fellowships for getting for a career change into science journalism?
Good question. I think you can do that with either the Niemans or the Knight Wallace fellowships, and we've certainly seen people do that in those fellowships. They come in as someone with a sort of general journalism background. They spend their time where they're building an expertise in a certain area, which may be science, and they come out and do science journalism. And so those are pretty well situated. Again, those are, academic year residential fellowships. So the downside of that is you actually have to, say, yes, I'm going to spend a year in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or a year in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And while I'm saying this, I just want to briefly mention a finance thing that we've been talking about at KSJ that's probably worth you guys knowing. All of us recognize that these academic fellowships blow up your life and are not always in the cheapest parts of the United States. I mean, Ann Arbor is probably marginally cheaper than Boston, Massachusetts, but both the Niemans and this coming year, it's a 9-month fellowship, 9.5 months. We'll pay $85,000 for that 9.5 months. We'll pay you a housing stipend to help cushion the blow, and it will be a blow, of renting in Boston, and we pay health insurance. And the Niemans also are $85,000. They will give you a stipend toward health insurance. They, in a way that is, they don't do housing, but they will contribute to childcare. I think JSK is at $95,000 right now, acknowledging that the Bay Area is not the cheapest area of the country to live in. And so, when you're thinking about it, and do your homework and look at what these fellowships pay, because some of them can offer you a substantial amount of money for that time period. And that's why I saw a question earlier in the chat about fellowships that support book work. We don't have people write and sell books during our fellowship, but I can promise you we have lots of fellows who their project is working on a book, right? So it is one way with these kinds of fellowships to figure out a way to get some sustainable income while you're working on a big project like that.
I'm going to put Betsy on the spot. I think I've been looking at the chat and getting most of the questions, but if are there any big topics that I've missed? And if you haven't seen, Betsy's been dropping a ton of links related to whatever we're talking about at the moment. So thank you so much for that, as well as everyone else too. So thank you for keeping that lively.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, a couple that are actually relevant to what Deborah was just talking about is about sort of how fellowships can balance or intersect with like more day-to-day reporting work. One person asked, for example, like after you do a year-long or longer fellowship like the Knight program, how do you get back on track as a freelancer, as a reporter? And similarly, another person asked about how fellowship work can intersect with news assignments, like can you use reporting to inform a fellowship application, or vice versa? Can you use your fellowship to inform future stories? So I think anything in that area of sort of yeah, using fellowships to inform reporting.
I can speak to a little bit of that. The reporting I do for fellowships has sort of always informed news reporting, partly because even if you're spending 6 or 7 months talking to a researcher, odds are they have a paper coming out at that time, and you've built up enough of a connection with them that you get a heads up. So that is just one quick way to do news stories and get a few bylines out as a freelancer. And in parallel, when doing reporting, that it's assuming your fellowship project is something that is this bigger passion project that's sort of simmering on the back burner through your day to day, the reporting does often feed into whatever that project is. So I think there's a very active back and forth between the day to day work and these bigger projects.
All right. I think, are there any other final questions, or I don't know, Neil or Deborah or Jyoti, do you have any final thoughts to share or advice for all of these folks who have their eye on fellowships?
Just apply, right?
Always
you're-
apply.
Always apply, and it's really worth your while if you're thinking about a specific topic, be it climate change or wildlife trafficking, to do enough homework to see who is really focusing on that. I will tell you briefly, I got a Sloan grant to support a book I did that was chemistry based, Poisoner's Handbook. After talking to a grant officer there who said, we really love the hard sciences, and so come back to us when you're not writing about ghosts, which was the book I was working on earlier. And so, figuring out the sweet spot that people are going to support will work for you in the short run and the long run, but mostly just apply. You'll get there.
I think, yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Oh, I just saw real quick that there was a question about podcasting and filmmaking fellowships. I haven't heard of ones that are specifically aimed around science journalism, but there are a bunch that are aimed at early career podcasts. Like I've worked in audio, in text, and so AIR is really good. Once upon a time, there was a Third Coast Fellowship, but I think I would also like. Something that might come back, and Resonate might also start doing things. So I would keep an eye out for those, and the NPR Croc, which is just the the classic early career audio fellowship.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Big thanks to our guests. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions. Thanks to all of you for attending. We will be following up, sharing eventually the video of this session, as well as the note stock as well. We'll invite you again to check out the Connector website at connector.casw.org, which I cannot wait to update with all of the resources that we don't already have in there that we've learned about today. So with that, we're at the top of the hour. So thank you, everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day.